يعني في الآخر لو في حد عنده أي أسئلة يا ريت يبقى نشارك كده. سلام يا كيرو.
أبونا.
اتفضل. سلام.
Sorry, Abuna, I'm just pulling the presentation up.
اتفضل. It's okay.
Okay, everybody sees my slideshow? Yes, thank you, Abuna. Okay, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and God, amen. Anytime I see the chat, and if anybody wants to just ask a question, feel free. I was asked to speak about an introduction to Old Testament and the Deuterocanonical books. So this is basically an overview of the whole Old Testament, so it's very high level. And it's the goal of this is to just to whet your appetite to some of the books in the Old Testament. What kind of big stories are where? How many books are in the Old Testament? What's the order of the books, etc. Okay, so this is kind of just a picture of the whole Old Testament. And I'm going to give you a couple of ways to try to remember the books of the Old Testament. So first you have the different categories. You have the books of law, the books of history, the books of poetry, and then the major prophets and the minor prophets. So you remember them like this: 5:12, 5:5:12. Okay, you guys got that? 5:12, 5:5:12. The first 5 books are the books of law, and then there's 12 historical books, and then 5 poetic books, 5 major prophets, and then 12 minor prophets. Taban, in the major prophets, we'll see that it's 5 books, but only 4 prophets. Okay, because Jeremiah, and then the Lamentations of Jeremiah. Okay, so here's another picture of it: 5:12, 5:5:12. How do we remember the first 5 books of the Old Testament? And we call those books the Pentateuch, or the books of the law, or the books written by Moses. So back in the day, I guess there used to be a electric company called General Electric. So GE, and maybe it's still around there. So you say General Electric lights never dim. Can you remember that? General Electric lights never dim. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So you remember the 5:12, 5:5:12 are the numbers of the books of the Old Testament. 5:12, 5:5:12. Okay. And then the books of law are general, electric, lights never dim. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So 512, 512 is how many books? Who's good at math here? Who's an accountant? 15 plus 24 is?
37.
39. Good job, guys.
39, yeah.
So 39 books, but we'll see at the end that there's other books that we added to the Old Testament, or that we account as books of law, books of the Old Testament. So this is kind of just a timeline of the Old Testament, creation, Genesis. You'll see here that the oldest, or one of the oldest books written is Job. So the order of the books in the Old Testament is not chronological of when they were written, but they're ordered by, like we said, the categories. So the history of the world, universal history, the period of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, the Exodus, Moses, and Leviticus, Numbers in the wilderness, Joshua in the promised land, entrance into Canaan, and Joshua, and then the judges and the kings, right? Division of the kingdoms, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. We found all of these books are written during the kings, most of the prophets, Bardu, during the kings' times. All of these are the minor prophets, some of the major prophets, and the exile and Daniel. Okay. So Genesis, from chapters 1 to 11, talks about the creation of the world, the fall of Adam and Eve, Abel and Cain, Noah's Ark and the flood, and the Tower of Babel. These are all main stories that happen in the first several chapters of Genesis, chapters 1 to 11. And then chapters 12 to 50, that's how we split up Genesis in two parts, Genesis 1 to 11, and then Genesis 12 to 50. 12 to 50 is the patriarchs. Abram's call to follow God, and that he would give him many sons as the sand of the seashores and the stars of the sky. Abraham and his servant Hagar, circumcision of all of the people, and then Sodom and Gomorrah happened, then the birth of Isaac, and then the sacrifice of Isaac, Isaac blessing Jacob, Jacob seeing the ladder in Bethel, Joseph and his brothers, Joseph in Egypt, and Jacob's burial. It ends with Jacob's burial. Okay, so that's Genesis, the overview of Genesis, and many of us probably have read all of these stories and went through these stories. After Genesis is Exodus. Exodus, we know the meaning of the word Exodus is to come out. So this is the story of the Khuruk, the Exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses' life in his youth, God calling Moses through the burning bush, the 10 plagues in Egypt, the Passover of the angel of death, the crossing of the Red Sea, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, getting the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai, building of the golden calf, and the instruction for building the sanctuary where God will meet them. Okay, what's the next book? Who can tell me?
Leviticus. Leviticus.
أنا مش هكمل لغاية ما حد بس مش قصبونة. What do you think? What's the next book? General, electric, lights, never dim. Genesis, Exodus, and then?
Leviticus.
Leviticus. Very good. Thank you. Who is this?
Julie and Jesse.
Julie and Jesse. Very good. Leviticus. Okay. So Leviticus is the books of the laws. Basically, mostly, all of the laws, the rabbinical laws, are written in Leviticus. And we may think that the only Jewish laws that they had were the 10 Commandments. No, they had 613 laws. Rabbinical laws were all in Leviticus. Here is written the ordination, the consecration of Aaron as priest, what Aaron's sons did, sacrilege against the priesthood, the laws regarding uncleanness and cleanness and how to atone, the Day of Atonement, the different sacrifices, the laws of holiness, and the laws governing vows and tithes. So all of the rabbinical laws or priestly laws, ways that they should offer and atone for sins and all these things, the laws of holiness and the laws governing how they practice was all written in Leviticus. Okay, so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. What's next?
Numbers.
Numbers.
Good job, Julie. We'll give somebody else a turn next time. Okay. So Jesse and Julie. Who else? Raham and okay. Yeah. So Numbers, very good. Numbers. Here we see the preparation for the journey from Sinai to Canaan. Sinai to Canaan. Canaan is what? Anybody know? Just a little quiz. Yeah. Anybody know what is Canaan? What do we call Canaan? It's called the Promised Land. Right? This was the what their goal was, Promised Land. Here we see Numbers also that God sent manna and quail for them to eat because they were complaining that they had nothing to eat, and in Egypt they were eating very good. So God sent them manna and quail every day. And then we see what happened with Korah, Dathan, Abiram. If anybody knows the story of three who wanted to be priests or wanted to offer incense, and they were not in the priestly tribe. And when they took them and some other people with them, they went to offer incense, the ground swallowed them up. And then we see here Aaron's death. And then we see the story of Balaam, the donkey who spoke, or Balaam's donkey, who spoke to him that he saw the angel. Okay, so this is all Numbers. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Last one of the 5. Julie's holding herself.
Deuteronomy.
Very good. Who said it?
Eden.
Eden. Good. Thank you. Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the second law giving. So there's laws that are in Leviticus, and here in Deuteronomy we see a second law giving. Transferring authority to Joshua from Moses. We know that Moses didn't enter the promised land, right? So Joshua takes the authority, prepares the people for the life in the promised land, and this ends with the death of Moses and succession of Joshua to Moses. Okay, so those are the 5 books of the law, the Pentateuch, written by Moses, right? Anybody can name all 5 of them for me? In the chat. Jesse, go ahead.
Sorry. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
Very good. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Good job. So now we finished the books of law. What's the next set of books?
History.
History. Who said it?
Julie.
Julie. Okay, very good. Okay, so we have the historical books, or the history books. And so we left off with Deuteronomy with the death of Moses and succession of Joshua. So the first book in history is what? If you see it here. Julie or Jesse or Eden. That's the 3 that I've heard so far. What's the next book?
Is it Esther?
No, look right here.
Joshua.
Joshua, very good, because now we've had the death of Moses and Joshua takes succession, right? He's taking lead of the people, and so now he writes his book. Okay, so we have Joshua is the first book of the historical books. Joshua preparing to cross the Jordan River is a story in Joshua. And it's just like how they crossed the Red Sea, Joshua crosses the Jordan River. And then the story of sending the 2 spies to Rahab to spy out the area there, and the crossing of the Jordan River, the defeat of Jericho was a big story. We know the story of Jericho and going around the walls of Jericho 7 times and the walls fell. The sun standing still, Abimelech, when Moses had his hands raised, then the Israelites would win. When he dropped his hands, the Israelites would lose. And so they held Moses' hands up so they can win. And the sun stood still and they all day. More conquests and defeats in Joshua, and then the death of Joshua and Eliezer, Aaron's sons. Okay, so that's Joshua. After Joshua, we have Judges. Judges, like it says, speaks about the judges. We have Deborah, and her defeat of Canaan, and Gideon defeats Midian. Okay, these are two big judges in the book of Judges. So Joshua, Judges. After Joshua and Judges, we have Ruth, and maybe many of you have read the story of Ruth. We know Naomi. Who is Naomi? Anybody know?
No, man.
Somebody say something. I'm sorry. Abuna, what's it? Naomi is who? Anybody know?
Ruth's daughter-in-law.
Not daughter-in-law. Opposite.
Mother-in-law. Oh,
Mother.
mother.
Yes, very good. So we have the story of Naomi and Ruth and Orpah, the daughters. Ruth said, I will not leave you, right? I will not forsake you. Your people is my people. Your God is my God. And then who is Boaz?
Is he the landowner?
Very good. And then he marries somebody?
Does he marry Ruth?
Yes, he does. So Ruth marries Boaz. And then we see Obed, the son. And from Ruth's line comes Jesse and David. So Obed is the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David the prophet. Okay? So this is the importance of the book of Ruth and the line of Christ from the root of Jesse. Okay, so we took Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Number 4 is 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel, here we see the stories of Eli and Samuel. Eli the priest and Samuel. And we see the stories of Samuel hearing the voice of God calling him, and he says, here I am, Lord, or your servant is listening. We see the ark is lost and recovered, so the ark that was built, Ark of the Covenant. Samuel and Saul established a monarchy. So this is the steps of the first king. Saul was the first king, Samuel was the prophet that set up the monarchy. Israel demands a king, and Saul becomes king. So Israel demands a king from God, from the prophets, from Samuel, and so God allows them to have a king. Saul becomes king. We see the famous story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel, and then we see the death of Saul and his sons. Okay, so that's 1 Samuel. So we took Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then 1 Samuel. What's next? What do you think?
2 Samuel.
2 Samuel, very good. Because انت عندكم ابونا سامويل بقى اكيد انتوا عارفين 1 and 2 Samuel يعني. So 2 Samuel, David learns of Saul's death, and then David reigns as king, and then it talks about the conquests of David, and then the story of David and Bathsheba. David confesses his sin to Nathan the prophet, so that's the next prophet at that time, and then the birth of Solomon, who becomes the next king, and the death of Absalom, who is the friend of David. So here we're going to see in the Samuels and the Kings and the Chronicles, now we have the stories of the kings and the prophets. Okay? So 1 and 2 Samuel, we see Saul, Eli and Samuel the prophet with Saul the king, and then we see also David the king and Nathan the prophet. So what books have we taken so far? 5 books.
Joshua,
Aywa.
Ruth. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel.
Joshua, Ruth, did you say the second book? What was the second book? So Joshua something, Ruth, 1 Samuel, Judges.
Oh, Judges.
Yes, JJ. So Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 and 2 Samuel. Okay, so we're taking 5 out of the 12. How many left? 12 minus 5. هديكم math النهارده.
7.
Yeah, 7. Thank you, Abuna. Okay.
Hi, Abuna. Sorry to interrupt. Would it be okay if you send me this
Sure, the slideshow?
yeah, please, because my storage on my phone is over, and I've been just taking screenshots.
No problem. I can send you the just pay attention. Don't worry about the screenshots. I'll send you the PowerPoint. I'll send
Sounds
it
good.
to Samuel. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, so now we have 1 Kings. 1 Kings, we see that the throne is passed to Solomon. So it was Saul and then David and now Solomon. And we know the famous prayer of Solomon. He prays for wisdom. And the famous story of also Solomon and the two mothers and splitting the baby in two, how he prayed for wisdom and how he uses wisdom. The death of Solomon and the reign of Rehoboam. Okay, and then the kingdom divided because of how Rehoboam acted with his people. There was Rehoboam and Jeroboam. One wanted to listen to his friends and not to the elders and the people who've ruled before him, and so he lost two of the kingdoms, two of the tribes. So the kingdom was split north and south in First Kings. Then we see the story of Elijah the Tishbite and Ahab the king, and the many stories of Elijah, the drought, no rain for 3 years, 6 months, the widow of Zarephath, right, and of the cake and the oil, and there's not enough to make for me and for you, and he said, make for me and then for you, and then it never ended. The cruise of oil, the victory over Baal with the 300 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and then the end of the drought. We also see the evil deeds of Ahab and Jezebel, the queen. We see Elisha follows Elijah, so his disciple now. Micah warns Ahab. Ahab is killed in battle, and then Azariah is king. So another king rules. Ahab the king, Azariah the king. Then we see now in different kingdoms, different kings. Okay, what's next after First Kings?
Second.
Second King. Thank you. سبق كذا النبأ.
سهلة دي سهلة.
لا لا لا. Second Kings, Elijah is caught up to heaven on a chariot. We know about this story, that Elijah has not died yet, and Elijah and Enoch are the two that have to come back in the end of the world before to die. So Elijah is caught up to heaven on a chariot of fire. Elisha then works the miracles of Elijah and double. He takes double the spirit of Elijah. Then we see the death of Elisha. And then we start the exiles, the Assyrian exile, Hezekiah as king of Judah and Isaiah the prophet. So now we have another king and prophets. Fall of Jerusalem and the temple, and then the Babylonian exile. So 2 exiles in Second Kings. All right, so now we've taken 7 books. What are the books? Who said it last time, Julie or Jesse?
Julie said it last time, but I think I could say it this time.
All right, go ahead.
Joshua.
Yep.
Judges.
Yep.
Ruth.
Mm-hmm.
1 Samuel.
Yep.
2 Samuel.
Yep.
And 1 Kings and 2 Kings.
Very good. So now we have how many books left?
6.
5. Very good, because we have 12 total. We took 7, so now we have 5 left. Okay, so now we have First Chronicles. Chronicles is like the word Chronicles says, is a storytelling book. So it tells you of the genealogies. Genealogy meaning the lives, the ancestry lines. Ark returning to Jerusalem, the last days of David. So even though we took this already, David, it goes back and tells some stories. So that's the last days of David, the reign of Solomon, preparing to rebuild the temple and charging Solomon to do so. So it's a lot of stories in this book, chronicles of what happened in the days of the kings and the prophets. And after First Chronicles would be Second Chronicles. Good job. Okay, Second Chronicles. Solomon reigns. So again, we're repeating some of the stories. Building and the dedication of the temple. Solomon's life, wisdom, wealth, and death. History of the kings of Judah to the end of the exile. So it's all a history book. Like you said, this is all the books of history. So we've taken now 9 books. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Okay? 9. Fadil, 3. So we have Ezra. Ezra was a scribe. It talks about the Babylonians capture Jerusalem, right? They take over Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile. The opposition to the reconstruction of the temple, so they refuse for them to rebuild the temple. And then they do rebuild the temple, reconstruction, completion of the temple, and it tells us the life of Ezra. Okay, so this is Ezra. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra. 2 more books. Nehemiah, also about building the wall of Jerusalem. Everything that was been destroyed, now we're rebuilding. So we built the temple, rebuilding the wall. and return of the exiles to Jerusalem. Everybody comes back to Jerusalem. Okay? Ezra and Nehemiah are let us come, let us build. Building the temple, building the walls. What's going on? Sorry. Adobe decided to give me an update, right? You see my screen still?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Fadl, what? One more book, Esther. And I think all of us know the book of Esther, Queen Esther, and Haman, who decided to plot and to hang Mordecai. And Mordecai, Queen Esther's uncle, and Queen Esther saves her people from destruction and death. Okay, so what are these called? The books of what?
Historical.
History. How many are there?
12.
12. Anybody can say all 12? Or 6 and 6. ممكن Jesse 6 or Julie 6 بقى.
I could try the first 6.
Okay, go ahead.
Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st Samuel, 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings.
ده بقولي number 7 بقى.
Okay, 2nd King.
2nd Kings. Okay. And then what else? Who wants to finish? Julie, you want to finish?
Sure.
First Chronicles, Second Chronicles.
Very good.
Ezra.
Ezra. Starts with N.
Nehemiah.
Nehemiah, and then?
Tobit.
It's on the screen.
Oh, Esther.
Esther, very good. Tobit, we'll see, but it's part of the second canonical books or the deuterocanonical books. بس انتوا يمكن فاتحين الانجيل قدامكم. You have the Bible open in front of you. All right. So now we've taken the 5 books of law and the 12 books of history. Okay? Now we have the 5 poetic books. And these books are Psalms, Job, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, okay, and Proverbs. Psalms and Proverbs and Job and Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs. These books are written as poetry, like the Psalms. And they're also very practical books, like Proverbs. Song of Songs is poetic, but Ecclesiastes is wisdom. So they're wisdom and poetic books. Talks of David is one who wrote Psalms, or most of the Psalms, temple musicians, and Moses to be one of the writers, and Job is one of the first books to be written, like we spoke about before. So these are the poetic books. Psalms, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Okay? So 5, 12, 5, 5, 12. We have the 5 books of the major prophets. I lumped them into one. So the major prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Okay? 4 major prophets. Now, the reason we call them major or minor are not because these prophets are bigger or better or said more important things. Major prophets because the volume of their writing was bigger. You'll find like Isaiah's 65 chapters. So the volume is bigger. So that's why they're called major prophets. Isaiah and Jeremiah, and we know that the person who wrote Lamentations is also Jeremiah. The Lamentations of Jeremiah, and then Ezekiel and Daniel. And then you have the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Okay? So know that Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. Isaiah, we call him the 5th evangelist because of all of his prophecies and prophetic works about the Christ coming, and a lot of what we read in Baschawik and all of the prophecies of the coming of Christ a lot of them come from Isaiah. So we call him the 5th evangelist. Daniel is known for his visions and those are the major prophets. In the minor prophets, we know the story of Hosea. It's a very good book. A lot of people like to start with Hosea when they're reading the prophets. And it speaks about Gomer and God's relationship with his people Israel and how Israel left him to worship other gods. And so he depicts this in the relationship of Hosea with Gomer, and he tells Hosea to go marry Gomer and bring her back to him and how he loves us. Yeah. And then we know the story of Jonah, obviously with Jonah and the whale in Nineveh. Those are the minor prophets. So those are just to whet your appetite here. Now, lastly, we have the Deuterocanonical books. Deuterocanonical means Deutero is the second canonical books. Okay? That's why we don't like to call them Apocrypha or even saying they're Deuterocanonical, because they are canonical. They were just not added to the original compilation of the books of the Bible, but we do confess that they are canonical books of the Bible. We have the story of Tobiah, and we read this during Great Lent in liturgy in the church. And this is the story of Archangel Raphael appearing to Tobias and Tobit the son. It's a very nice story. The father getting blinded in his eyes and to go to a faraway country to marry his cousin and to get some money and bring it back to his dad. And his friend that was on the way was Archangel Raphael, and he was with him the whole way. So it's a very nice story. We have Judith, and Judith is a woman, a very strong woman in the Old Testament. And we hear the story of how she defeated Holofernes for the people of Israel, and that God was with her. Tobit, Judith. First and Second Maccabees speak a lot about the wars and this family, the Maccabee family. We have the Wisdom of Solomon. It's a completion of the Wisdom of Solomon, the Wisdom of Sirach, or Joshua, the son of Sirach. And this is a very nice book to read. It's practical. It's like Proverbs. And you'll find that these books are in the Orthodox Study Bible. If you have the Orthodox Study Bible, you'll find these books there. And we also read Joshua, the son of Sirach, in Beskha. And then we have Baruch, and then the Daniel completion, which is the story of Susanna. We find that story of Susanna in this completion of Daniel. And we also read it during Apocalypse night and the completion of Esther. So we find that here we have seven extra books, Deuterocanonical books. So we originally had 39 books of the Old Testament plus 7. So 39 plus 7 equals 46. So the total number of canonical or Old Testament books are 46 Old Testament books.
I see. Is 7 plus 2.
The completion.
Completion, yes.
Yeah. So we have Tobit to Baruch is 7. And then these two are just completions of stories. We already have the book of Daniel. We already have the book of Esther in the Old Testament. So 2, 4, 6, 7. So we have 46 books, 7 Deuterocanonical books without the completions. Any of the completions are added, and 49 books. So how many, can you guys split up the books for me? So we have 5, 12, 5, 5, 12, 7. Okay? Can you remember that? Anybody can tell me the first 5 books of the Old Testament? Jesse, the first 5 books?
So is it the Joshua's?
No, we're
Judges?
going with the Genesis, the first 5 books that we talked about. Genesis.
Okay. Genesis, Numbers, Leviticus, Exodus.
Give them to me. General Electric Lights Never Dim. Genesis.
Exodus.
Exodus, yeah.
Leviticus. Numbers, Deuteronomy.
Very good. The first 5 books of the Old Testament written by Moses, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. After that, we have the 12 books of what? Julie.
We can ask other people.
Sure.
12 books of history.
Yeah. Joshua. Anybody else? Eden?
Should I?
Sure, go ahead.
Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First Kings, Second Kings, First Corinthians, Second Corinthians.
Hold on. Let's go back. First
Okay.
Samuel, Second Samuel first, okay?
Oh, okay.
Then
First Samuel,
Kings,
Second Samuel.
Kings.
First Kings, Second Kings, First Corinthians, Second Corinthians,
Chronicles.
Chronicles.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Corinthians is New Testament. Okay,
Sorry.
let's go
And
over.
then-
Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, First and Second what?
Chronicles.
Chronicles. Very good. And then
Ezra.
Ezra, and then and
No.
Nehemiah.
No.
Very good. Nehemiah.
And then Jeremiah. And then Esther.
And then Esther. Very good. Okay, who's next? Who can tell me what's the next 5 books? What do we call them? The books of law and the books of history, and then what? Kiro, Tony, Maivin, Rehem, Eden. After the 5 books of law and the 12 books of history, we have the 5 books of what?
Poetry.
Poetry. Very good. Can you say any of them, Eden? Or the 5?
Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Songs of Solomon.
Very good. 5 poetry books: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Song of Songs. Okay. After the 5 poetic books, we have what? So Eden, Jesse, and Julie said, Hero, Tony, Maivin, and Rehan. The last 4 of you. Anybody tell me what's the next 5 books?
Major prophets.
Major prophets. Who said that?
Maven.
Maivin. Very good. So we have the major prophets. Can you name how many major prophets are there?
Well, 4.
4. Very good. Who are they?
Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel,
Yep.
and Daniel.
Very good. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So what's the 5th book that we didn't mention?
Jeremiah's Lamentations.
Lamentations of Jeremiah. Very good.
Yes, that one.
And then after the major prophets, we have who are? Anybody else? Kiro, Tony, Rehem?
Minor prophets.
Very good. Both of you answered. Who's the other person that answered?
I answered.
Kiro and Tony. Okay. So we have the minor prophets. How many minor prophets? Tony or Kiro, how many minor prophets?
1 dozen.
12.
1 dozen. Very good. 12 minor prophets. Can you name any of them for me?
Hosea,
Good.
Daniel.
No. Daniel's.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Jonah.
Jonah. Very good. Kiro, anyone else? Can you name any minor prophets? Okay, so good. You can say Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. So if you can remember Malachi, Hosea is good, Jonah is good, Malachi is good, and there's many in between. Okay, and then what do we have? The last sets of books that we talked about are what? If Rehem is with us, she can answer. If not, then Tony or Kiro board.
The Deuterocanonical.
Deuterocanonical books, very good. There's 7 of them. Can you name any of them?
Tobit, Maccabees, 1 and 2.
Good. Okay, and then we got Judith and Baruch, right? And then Wisdom of Solomon, Wisdom of Sirach. Very good. So how many total books do we have in the Old Testament?
46.
Very good. Thank you, Myvin. 46 books in the Old Testament, 39 plus 7 that we accept as canonical. Any questions? Thank you, Otabuna, for having me. I hope that today's lesson was just to get your minds working, get you to recognize the books of the Old Testament, to know how many there are, to know some of the order and to know some of the books. And then you can go back and get familiar with them and some of the stories in the Old Testament. Glory be to God forever and ever.
One question, Abuna. Yeah, about the New King James Version and the King James Version. What do you recommend for us to read?
Oh, I think as a church, we like to read the New King James Version as a church, yeah. But it's okay to also use other versions in studying the Bible, yeah. I know that NIV is good as well, but the main one that we use is New King James Version. Best the translation for the Old Testament, the best one would be the Septuagint, which is the translation of the 70. You're probably going to take this as you go into the Bible Yani section. But the Septuagint is what is the translation of the 70. And you'll find that in the Orthodox Study Bible. And it has the deuterocanonical books in it. So I think that's the best translation for the Old Testament